Rapper Heavy D of Heavy D and the Boyz has died. An agent confirmed his passing Tuesday, but didn't say how or where he died.
When Heavy D passed in 2011, the hip-hop world stopped to mourn.
Heavy D was only 44 years old.
The memorial was packed with legends: Diddy, Jay-Z, Mary J. Blige, even Will Smith. But when fans looked closer, something shocking stood out.
The funeral drew a who's who from the hip-hop world, including Jay-Z, Queen Latifah, and Heavy D's old friend Sean Diddy Combs, who's also from Mount Vernon.
Where was the cast of Living Single? The very people tied to Heavy D through friendship, music, and television history. Only Queen Latifah appeared.
Like, these are major losses, you know, at a young age.
Visibly shaken, honoring a man she had called family. But the others, Kim Fields, Kim Coles, Erica Alexander, T.C. Carson, and John Henton, were nowhere to be found. No appearances, no public statements, nothing. It didn't take long for whispers to spread. Were they too busy, or was this absence a message? What unfolded behind the cameras of Living Single might hold the answers, and it's far darker than anyone expected, because behind the laughter, the friendships, and the iconic theme song, there were fractures, power struggles, Hollywood politics, and wounds so deep they never healed. And the truth? It explains why, when the world said goodbye to Heavy D, the cast of Living Single stayed away. But the real story is even more shocking than that. Heavy D wasn't just another rapper in the golden era of hip-hop. He was a bridge between worlds. Known as the overweight lover, he brought joy, charisma, and an undeniable groove that made him impossible to ignore. But beyond the music, he had something else: genuine relationships with people across the industry. And one of his most meaningful bonds connected directly to Living Single. When Heavy D appeared on the show, it wasn't a random cameo. He wasn't just a guest star collecting a paycheck. His energy blended seamlessly with the cast, almost as if he had been part of that Brooklyn apartment the whole time. And his influence stretched even further. He helped shape the show's unforgettable theme song, stamping his legacy into every episode that aired. His connection with Queen Latifah ran even deeper. Before television deals and Hollywood stardom, the two were friends in the trenches of the early hip-hop scene. They supported each other, grew together, and built careers that transformed not only music, but culture. For Latifah, Heavy D wasn't just a collaborator, he was family.
Like my brother, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, these are major losses, you know, at a young age.
So when fans saw her at the memorial, eyes red, voice trembling, but what about the rest of the cast? To the outside world, Living Single looked like one big family. On screen, they laughed, argued, loved, and leaned on each other in ways that mirrored real friendships. But what most viewers never knew was that once the cameras shut off, the bond wasn't as strong as it seemed. And that truth would become painfully obvious the day Heavy D was laid to rest. But to understand the silence of the missing cast, you have to look at what was really happening behind those studio walls. And it's not the story fans want to believe. The day of Heavy D's memorial was nothing short of monumental. It wasn't just a funeral, it was a gathering of giants. Music royalty filled the aisles. Jay-Z arrived with the quiet weight of a man honoring a peer. Diddy, who had built Bad Boy Records on the same streets Heavy D once walked, sat front and center.
He was a superstar in every sense of the word. He was larger than life. You know, from the way he rapped, to the way he dressed, to the way he danced, to the way he moved.
Mary J. Blige fought back tears.
How much an inspiration Heavy D had on your career?
Heavy had a huge effect on all of us, and he was inspiring and optimistic, and he just always told us, or gave us great advice, and he just always wanted us to do good, and he was like a father figure to us.
Usher, Will Smith, even Spike Lee, each face a reminder of just how deeply Heavy D had touched the world. It was more than a farewell, it was a statement. Heavy D had been loved, respected, and woven into the DNA of hip-hop and entertainment. His absence left a void too heavy for words. But as cameras panned across the crowd, something strange became clear. There was Queen Latifah, grieving openly, her sorrow echoing through every tribute, and then nothing. No Kim Fields, no Kim Coles, no Erica Alexander, no T.C. Carson, no John Henton. The people who had shared screen time with Heavy D, who had smiled beside him in one of television's most beloved sitcoms, were completely missing. Fans noticed immediately. Social media lit up with questions. Where were they? How could they not show up for a man who was part of their show's history? Even the press couldn't ignore the glaring absence. To some, it felt like betrayal. To others, it hinted at something far more complicated than busy schedules or private grief. Because the truth is, the cast of Living Single wasn't just absent from Heavy D's memorial. They had been drifting apart long before that day. And while the memorial highlighted their absence, the seeds of that distance were planted years earlier, in the middle of heated battles with the network, broken friendships, and and painful betrayals that had never healed. The question is, who cracked first? And why did those fractures leave scars so deep that even a funeral couldn't bring them back together? The answer starts with one cast member who refused to stay silent and paid the ultimate price. Among the living single cast, one voice refused to stay silent. T.C. Carson, the man behind the suave and sharp tongue. Kyle Barker. On screen, he was magnetic, smooth, confident, and unforgettable. But off screen, TC was fighting battles most fans never knew about. And those battles cost him more than just a storyline, they cost him his place in Hollywood.
I would be the spokesperson for it. And before I left, they called me in and they basically said, all these problems that we've been having, you're the person they listen to. So if you said something else, then they would do that. And I kind of looked at them, I said, well, first of all, we're dealing with 5 grown people and they have their own mindset and their own ideas about what we're doing. And everything we come to you with is a group decision, not my decision. But if you think I have that much power, then I need to have a different job.
From the beginning, Carson recognized what others tried to ignore. Living single wasn't getting the respect or the resources it deserved. Ratings were strong. The show had a loyal fan base, and yet the cast was paid less. The show was promoted less, and Fox seemed determined to keep it in the shadows while shows like Friends received the royal treatment. Carson wasn't afraid to call it out. He confronted producers, executives, and anyone who would listen. He pushed back against pay disparities. He demanded better treatment for his castmates. In interviews years later, he admitted that he was labeled difficult simply for speaking truth to power. And in Hollywood, that label can be a death sentence. Soon, Kyle Barker's presence on screen began to shrink. The witty back and forth with Maxine cut short, the larger storylines disappearing. And then, in a move that shocked fans, Kyle was written off the show entirely. Just like that, T.C. Carson was erased. For Carson, the betrayal cut deep. He wasn't just losing a job, he was losing a family he had fought to protect. The wounds left by his firing never fully healed, and they cast a long shadow over his relationships with the rest of the cast. Some said Queen Latifah, with her growing influence as an executive producer, didn't stand in his corner. Others whispered that his outspoken nature created tension that fractured the group from the inside. So when Heavy D's memorial came years later, Carson's absence wasn't just about mourning, it was about distance. Distance from a cast, from an industry, and from a time in his life where his voice had been silenced. And the truth is, he wasn't alone. Because while TC was fighting the network, another storm was brewing behind the cameras. A storm tied to power, ego, and the growing divide between Queen Latifah and another star of the show. If TC Carson's clash with the network exposed one kind of fracture, the tension between Kim Fields and Queen Latifah revealed another, one rooted not in contracts or ratings, but in power and recognition. Kim Fields was no stranger to fame. Long before Living Single, she had become a household name as Tootie on The Facts of Life. Audiences grew up with her. She carried decades of credibility and star power into the show. So when she stepped into the role of Regine Hunter, the stylish, sharp-tongued diva, many assumed she would be the show's anchor. But there was a twist. Queen Latifah wasn't just another cast member, she was also an executive producer. That title gave her a seat at the table, a voice in creative decisions, and a kind of influence the other actors simply didn't have. And as Latifah's music career soared and her Hollywood clout grew, her presence on Living Single began to overshadow even Fields' long resume. Whispers spread on set. Some insiders said Fields felt sidelined, her voice drowned out by Latifah's authority. Others claimed the two respected each other professionally, but the warmth stopped when the cameras did. For Fields, it may have felt like she was losing control of her own identity in a space where she should have been celebrated. For Latifah, the weight of leadership may have created an invisible wall between her and her co-stars. And while the tension was rarely discussed openly, it lingered. It lived in side glances, unspoken frustrations, and an unbridgeable gap between two powerful women navigating an industry built to pit them against each other. So when Heavy D's memorial came, that gap was impossible to ignore. Queen Latifah stood there, grieving a lifelong friend. Fields was absent, whether by choice, circumstance, or quiet resentment. To fans, it looked like distance. To those who knew the history, it felt like confirmation of a divide that had been growing for years. And yet, Fields wasn't the only one who felt overshadowed. Behind her, two other castmates were carrying their own frustrations, ones tied not to personal rivalries, but to a system that seemed determined to keep them invisible. If Kim Fields wrestled with power dynamics, Kim Coles and Erica Alexander carried a different kind of wound, one carved by neglect, underestimation, and the crushing weight of systemic bias. Kim Coles, the heart of Living Single, as the sweet, quirky Sinclair, brought brought joy to millions. Audiences adored her innocence and humor, but behind the laughter, Coles often felt overlooked. Paychecks didn't reflect her popularity, storylines rarely gave her the same depth as others. In interviews years later, she admitted feeling undervalued, as though her character's lighthearted role meant the network didn't take her seriously. Imagine carrying a show that made people smile, yet being treated as disposable. Erica Alexander's struggle cut even deeper. As Maxine Shaw, the fierce and razor-sharp attorney, she was magnetic. Fans loved her, critics praised her, and yet Hollywood barely acknowledged her brilliance. Alexander has spoken openly about the bitter truth.
I think blackness, racism, all the disparities, inequities were there, and especially in the early 90s. And I say the blacker the berry, the sweeter the juice, the tighter the noose. And that's real. So it's tough. And so I'm very gratified with, being a dark-skinned actress and also being funny and maybe not being the ideal of what they thought funny girls looked like. They didn't know what to do with me, and I got offered nothing after I finished that show. Absolutely nothing. No.
Living Single never received the push it deserved. She watched as Friends, a show with an eerily similar premise, exploded into global fame while Living Single was sidelined. Same format, same themes, different faces, and only one got the spotlight. For Alexander, the sting of racism in Hollywood wasn't abstract. It was personal. She and her castmates lived it every day. Lower budgets, weaker marketing, dismissive treatment. She once said that Friends was like living single with white people, and the industry's response proved her right. The frustration for Coles and Alexander wasn't just about fame or money, it was about fairness. They gave their all, yet the system stacked the deck against them, and when the show ended, that bitterness lingered. So by the time Heavy D's memorial arrived, the emotional distance wasn't just from Queen Latifah or each other, it was from an entire industry that had failed them. To stand at that funeral meant stepping back into a world that had robbed them of recognition, a wound they weren't ready to reopen. And yet, while Coles and Alexander carried resentment, one cast member carried something else entirely, trauma so devastating that it changed the course of his life forever. While some cast members wrestled with industry politics and unhealed resentments, John Henton faced a very different battle, one that nearly took his life. Known to fans as Overton Wakefield Jones, the lovable handyman with a big heart, Henton brought warmth and grounding to Living Single. He was the steady presence in a show full of sharp tongues and big personalities. But away from the cameras, his story turned heartbreak. In 2000, just 3 years after Living Single ended, Henton's world changed forever.
Did all y'all know it was about it was ending?
We knew it was the last show. I don't know how they told us. I don't even remember. That was a very difficult time in my life.
Understood.
Very cloudy judgment,
right.
all kind of stuff. But yeah, we knew it was the last show, and because I remember I said something and made Kim Coles cry, and I felt bad about that because it was just weird leaving everything because we had created a nice little thing there, man. Like I said, we're still #1, and we about to wrap this up. Why? Everybody was just hurt.
A devastating car accident left him with life-altering injuries. He lost sight in one eye, his face was permanently scarred, and the man whose smile had lit up millions of living rooms suddenly found it difficult to face the world. Recovery was long, painful, and isolating. Hollywood is notoriously unforgiving, and while Henton had talent, casting directors often overlooked him after the accident. The industry's silence was as cruel as the crash itself. For a man who once thrived in the spotlight, the sudden withdrawal into obscurity was crushing. Friends said he became quieter, more private. Public appearances dwindled. He chose peace over attention, healing over performance. And while fans missed him, few understood the depth of what he had endured. So when Heavy D's memorial was announced, Henton's absence wasn't fueled by resentment or rivalry. It was the result of a man who had been pulled into the shadows by trauma. To step into that high-profile event, surrounded by cameras and industry insiders, may have been a weight too heavy to carry. In his silence, though, lies a truth the audience rarely considers. Not every absence is a protest. Sometimes, it's the echo of pain too raw to expose. And yet, when you piece together Henton's retreat with the others' simmering frustrations, a larger picture emerges. Their absences weren't isolated. They were part of something systemic, an industry that broke trust, fractured bonds, and left the cast of Living Single, divided when unity mattered most. And nothing exposes that divide more clearly than the story of how Friends rose to global dominance while Living Single was left in the shadows. The shadow of Friends looms over Living Single like an unanswered question. How could two shows with almost identical setups, young friends navigating love, work in New York, end up with such different legacies? The truth lies in Hollywood's bias. When Living Single premiered in 1993, it was groundbreaking. A Black ensemble cast leading a primetime sitcom was rare, and the chemistry was undeniable. Yet Fox gave it little promotion, treating it as secondary despite solid ratings. Then, in 1994, NBC launched Friends, same concept, but with 6 white actors. This time, the networks poured millions into to marketing. Billboards plastered cities, critics swooned, and within a year, Friends was a global phenomenon. For Erica Alexander, who played Maxine, the sting was personal. She later admitted that Hollywood ignored Living Single because of race. Even as Friends rode their blueprint to fame, the other cast members felt it too, seeing their show sidelined while another took their place at the top. By the time Heavy D's memorial came, those wounds hadn't healed. Their absence wasn't just personal distance, it was the echo of an industry that never valued them, a silence louder than words. Heavy D's memorial wasn't just the farewell of a music icon, it was the unmasking of hidden truths. On the surface, Living Single was a celebration of friendship and Black excellence. But behind the cameras, the story was layered with power struggles, fractured bonds, and an industry that never gave them the respect they deserved. Their absence from that memorial wasn't about missing an event. It was a reflection of wounds too deep, scars too heavy, and silence that spoke louder than words. What looked like unity on screen was, in reality, a reminder of how Hollywood can divide, diminish, and discard even the brightest stars. And yet, remembering their story matters, because it reminds us that the faces we laugh with on television often carry battles we never see. If you want to keep uncovering the untold stories, the secrets, and the truths Hollywood tries to bury, stay with us here at Black Spotlight. There's always more to reveal, and we're just getting started.